everybody, welcome back to another episode of Access Blockbusters Pod, episode number 47. And guys, to say that this is going to be a big episode is an understatement. We have so much to talk about here. It's crazy. So I'm going to keep the intro short, but just to preview, guys, we have Agatha's finale, episodes 8 and episode 9. Did they land? Was it a successful MCU finale? Unlike a lot of the other MCU TV shows, we'll find out, at least for me. Penguin, episode 6, we have to talk about. Also, the new MCU trailer for the 2025 projects, a skeleton crew trailer. You know, all these different things that have happened in the past week. I'm so excited to talk about with you guys here on Access Blockbusters Pod, episode 47. So guys, if you are listening on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel. Thank you so much for everyone who's been joining the Access Blockbusters crew over the last few weeks, last couple months. Podcasting has been so fun. I've been able to be a lot more consistent by posting the hour to 2 hour long podcast episodes and then posting clips from them. It's been awesome to hear your guys' thoughts on all these different topics. And yeah, make sure to give a like, subscribe, comment down below with your thoughts on any of the topics. There are always time codes in the description, so just make sure to check it out there. If you are listening on Spotify, we do have a Spotify account, and so if you want to listen to audio only and you want to run or cook or take a walk, whatever it is, just make sure to go on Spotify, leave a rating, and let me know what you think about the podcast there as well. Guys, there are so many topics. I don't want to delay too much longer. Let's get into it. Here we go. So to start out the podcast here, I actually wanted to talk about something a little bit different. So there are time codes in the description, and if this doesn't interest you, totally fine. Feel free to skip ahead to whatever topic you want to listen to. But I wanted to actually give a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look at how this podcast is made and why. Because I've been getting some comments that have been raising some points of confusion as to, wait, why is it like this? And why is this video coming out at this day? And what's going on here? And why do you do it like this? And I thought, I just think it would be better to distill all of this into one segment so that in case anyone's ever confused, I can always, as long as this model of the podcast continues, I can always point to this and hopefully this will make a lot of sense. So again, if you don't want to listen to this to start out the podcast, totally fine. It's here in case people are curious, and then you can always go into the time codes in the description and skip ahead to whatever segment you want to listen to. So here's what happens. Every week, right? I wait throughout the week and I compile these stories, these breaking news stories and different episodes of television and movies that I watch and whatnot that are relevant. I compile all of these things and sometimes even record them earlier in advance. So for example, if a piece of breaking news, let's just say Spider-Man 4 is titled Spider-Man Venom Verse. Spider-Man Venom Verse, okay. And that's a story that comes out on Tuesday. I have a running list every week of topics that I want to discuss, and then I write them down. And sometimes if it's more important for me to be, to have my mind fresh, for example, with the Agatha reviews or with the Penguin reviews, I usually record them right after. Because I think it's a benefit instead of having to record everything in one shot, which it's just me talking and it can be quite exhausting. I've tried this before where I just compile all the topics and then wait until the last day and then I record it all, I edit it all, and it's exhausting. My voice is shot usually. And so at least for some segments, especially in those segments where I think it's beneficial for my thoughts to be fresh, like TV reviews, I just record them right after. And then I save those segments for later and I compile them all into the podcast that you hear at the end of the day. So anyways, going back to the process again, I compile these stories. Let's say Spider-Man Venomverse is announced on Tuesday, and let's say that I really think I need to talk about it right then so that I don't forget certain things that I want to talk about. I'll record it Tuesday evening as a kind of individual clip, but then we'll be able to hold on to that until I compile them all. So then usually what the process is that on Friday, I have all the stories collected. I know what I want to talk about. I know what I've already been talking about. And from there, it's a matter of maybe I have a few stories that I need to record. And then I record them on Friday afternoon, Friday evening, and then I put them all together. And so at this point here, we have the podcast in its raw form, in its audio form, right? Because I have all of these segments put together. Now, if I was just doing an audio-only podcast, that would be it, pretty much. I could just upload it on Friday evening and be done with it, right? But I also have the YouTube channel. Actually, the YouTube channel is the primary way in which people can access the podcast. And what I've realized is that there are some people who really enjoy listening to the hour to sometimes 2 hours. I think that was the longest podcast episode I did, 2 hours long. Crazy. I did not do that one in one sitting. I did that in a few segments throughout the week. But that one, podcasts it's not for everyone, right? I totally understand. So because of that, I thought, and I tried this out and it seemed pretty successful because people who had not, who did not usually engage with the longer podcasts were able to find the YouTube channel and the podcast through these clips that I post. And so what I do is that usually on Saturdays, although it's changed recently with the Penguin, which I'll talk about in just a second, but usually what I'll do is on Friday, I'll finish up the podcast and then I'll put the whole thing up on Saturday and as a YouTube video, right? But then throughout the rest of the week, I will have broken up the podcast into segments, and then I will be releasing those segments throughout the week. And that's why some of the segments are about things that have happened maybe 5-6 days ago, and that's because they're originally from the podcast. So I've gotten questions like, wait, this happened a week ago. Why are you still talking about it? It's because I talked about it actually still not the day the news came out, because I just think the model for me personally and what I'm doing in my life, it's not sustainable for me to every single time a piece of breaking news drops, I just can't run to a microphone and upload a video. It's just not sustainable, for me. And so doing the weekly podcasts and recording them by Friday is what I do. And so, yeah, I usually post the full podcast on Saturday. I split it up into clips, and that's why sometimes the clips, come out a little bit later. And that's why you'll see an Agatha review, maybe not on Wednesday night when the episode comes out, but maybe on a Monday or a Sunday, for example. So that's one question I've heard a lot, is why, for example, the Jon Stewart news, that was crazy because we got new news about that pretty much every other day. And so some of the clips were a little bit outdated, but still it was fun to talk about them nonetheless. Now, people have also asked me about the format of the podcast, like as in the video format of the podcast. Why do you just use pictures, right? Why do you just rely on doing kind of a slideshow format? A couple specific reasons for that. Number one, because you'll know, actually, for those of you who have been sticking around the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel for a long while now, I did almost exclusively edited videos before. And I probably still will at some point. I probably will get back to that, eventually, maybe do them once in a while. They were fun. They were definitely fun. They were more scripted, right? Because another comment that I got was, why is this, why aren't you cutting out things and leaving in some pauses and, things like that and just talking, right? And I told them, because this is a podcast. I understand that if I clip part of the podcast, right, if I clip part of the segments and put them on YouTube, that it looks like a traditional YouTube video. But that's why I'm very clear in the description of these videos, of these segments, which I know a lot of people don't usually read the description of YouTube videos. Totally fine. But that's why I put them there, is to tell them this is a clip from the Access Blockbusters pod, which is in full, in a separate video. And so that's another question that I've gotten. But basically, I used to do edited videos. And the thing about edited videos, right, is that let's say I record for about 12 minutes. 12 minutes of recording, if I'm fast, is maybe 2 to 3 hours of editing, video editing. Not to mention something like a 20-minute video, for example. If I were to try to edit an entire hour-long podcast into a video format where it's, actual videos and clips and things like that going on in the background, it would take me probably 2 weeks to do, to make sure that it's up to, it's up to the kind of standard that I like to have. And that is just simply not sustainable for me. I'm also not at the point where I can hire an editor or anything like that. And so for the time being, the best compromise that I could give, because I could also just put the entire podcast up with no visuals and just put up my logo. And I used to do that, actually, because when I was first experimenting with this podcast, and I thought, it still takes some time to compile all the pictures and do all those things, but it takes much less time. And I figure people would much rather see some pictures of what I'm talking about, even if it doesn't line up one-to-one, if it doesn't line up with exactly what I'm saying. If I'm talking about the Penguin, it's not the exact scene always with the picture, but it's just because I figure it's better to give, something to look at than nothing at all. And people have asked me, like, why can't you do, why can't it be one-to-one? Why can't it be every single thing you're talking about is the picture that's on the screen? And I would love to do that. But even that, right, is adding, for an hour and a half long podcast, that would add at least 2 to 3, 4 hours of time. And it's not that I don't want to put in that time. It's just that I don't have that time. Because if I want to upload the podcast on Friday to come out on Saturday, then I would basically be spending all of Friday night doing that, because this isn't something I could really be working on throughout the week necessarily, because Friday is the day when all the things come together, right? Friday is the day when I compile everything, compile all of my old recordings and whatnot, and then come together and make this. And at that point, I'm doing the final touches. I'm writing the descriptions, the tags, and all that kind of stuff, and uploading all the pictures and doing all those things. And so that process alone will take me a few hours usually, and I'm happy to do it. It's fun, right? But I'm just to kind of give some transparency, if I were to, even just try to have edited clips in there, or try to match up every 10 seconds, with what I'm talking about with the right picture, it would probably kill me. It probably would kill me. And I'm just trying to balance, I think at the end of the day, what I'm hoping is an entertaining product, because again, podcasts are primarily audio formats, right? There's a reason that we have a Spotify platform, but I'm happy to put it on YouTube because YouTube is my, platform of choice, and that's where I get to interact with all of you guys, and that's been awesome. And so, that's the reason that the podcast is the way that it is. Sometimes, right? Going back to the Penguin, sometimes I will make an exception because, I'll finish compiling everything for the week on Friday, and I'll have the podcast ready to go by Saturday. But sometimes I think that it's better to release a clip earlier because every single day that passes, it's gonna lose relevance, right? That's why I don't release these segmented clips in order that they were in, the same order that they were in the podcast, because if I release the Agatha All Along episode 5 review 3 days after episode 6 came out, not really, worth it for me. As it is, I'm releasing the Penguin spoiler discussions the day before the next episode comes out. It's not ideal. It is absolutely not ideal, but it's sort of the best thing I can do given the way that I, run production on these podcast episodes. And so that's why you'll see the, Penguin spoiler discussion for episode 6, for example, come out on Saturday, and then the full podcast with that clip in it come out the next day, just because I want to get that Penguin, spoiler discussion out as early as I can, which I know is still only a day earlier, but the alternative is that it comes out after the next episode. And I think at that point, it's just really not worth, releasing the segment at all. So hopefully that gives you guys, for those of you who are curious and for those of you who had questions about the Access Blockbusters pod, that gives you some insight into why I'm doing what I'm doing. I could totally be changing up the format at any point, but this has been working pretty well for me thus far, and I've been pretty happy with it. So yeah, if any more questions arise, let me know in the comments, and would love to talk about it there with you guys. All right, guys, so let's talk a little bit of Knull. So for those of you who have not seen Venom: The Last Dance, this is going to contain spoilers for Venom: The Last Dance. So if you haven't seen it, just save the segment for later, or if you don't care about spoilers, feel free to watch on. But if you do care, feel free to save the segment for later. Go watch Venom: The Last Dance if you so desire, and then come back and watch the segment later, because we are going to be talking everything Knull in Venom 3. So this is your full spoiler warning. Let's get into it. So I have done my review, spoiler review, non-spoiler and spoiler review, actually, of Venom: The Last Dance, and I personally was not the biggest fan of it, although it had some of those classic Eddie Venom moments that I love from the previous 2 films, but again, just overall was not a big fan of it. Now, one of the predictions I had going into Venom: The Last Dance is that Knull would not be in more than 10 minutes of the movie. Sure enough, he is literally hardly a character. He's in the movie for maybe 3 minutes total. And he says 3 things, probably, and this is including the post-credits scene. So the situation is, we did a segment a couple weeks ago where we dissected the comments made by the director and the writer of Venom 1, 2, and I believe 3, and the director of Venom 3, Kelly Marcel. And she said in her quote that this is just the beginning of Knull, and he is going to appear in future projects, and this is just the beginning for the King in Black. And we talked about what did that mean? Did that mean he was going to be the big bad for the Sony universe? Does that mean that he's going to be in the MCU, Spider-Man 4? What does this mean for the character of Knull? And I was waiting to see the film itself to maybe understand, okay, so if he appears in the post-credit scene, this was a scenario that was in my head where he appears in the post-credit scene and he's like, okay, I didn't get this Venom, but in the multiverse, there's another Venom on Earth 616 and I'm going after him. And it's like, okay, do I like that? No, not really, but that's the direction that we're going in. We have some more clarity. Turns out, though, in the post-credit scene that we did get, we got absolutely nothing, because Knull is like, oh, Venom's dead. I'm coming for you guys. Dun, dun, dun. And that's the end of the movie. Literally get nothing, other than just a vague threat. And to be fair, vague threats have been, effective in post-credit scenes. In the first Avengers film, we had Thanos, who was like, he didn't even talk. The other, if that was his name, I forget his name, but was like, hey, to challenge them is to court death. And then Thanos just turns around and smiles. So that was a vague threat, but it eventually paid off because that was just setting the scene for Thanos as the big bad. If that's what they wanted to do with Knull in this movie, though, complete and utter failure, in my opinion, because they set up Knull as the villain of the movie. He is literally the first thing you see on screen in Venom: The Last Dance, and his story went nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. He starts out in prison, he ends in prison. He's like, I'm gonna come get you now that Venom's dead. The end. So that was disappointing. And honestly, there just wasn't enough there to give me a sense of whether or not I even would want to see the character of Knull back again. But that's not really the question that we're asking here, whether or not I want to see Knull back. The question is, after Venom: The Last Dance, now that we've seen the film, for those of you who have seen the film, where is Knull going to appear next? Do we have any more clarity as to where Knull is going to appear? I think we have some clarity, after having seen the film, of where Sony wants Knull to appear next. I have some thoughts, though, of what actually is going to happen. So let me start out with this. Is Knull going to appear in the MCU? Was that the plan? I think the answer is no. Honestly, no. I think there's actually a very sneaky piece of evidence that I have for this, and that is early on in the film, when Eddie returns from the Earth 616 universe, and they kind of recreate it in a way, they make it look a little bit different, that he returns through a portal instead of just fading away like all the rest of the people in Spider-Man No Way Home. A little bit of a continuity error, doesn't matter, doesn't really, affect the movie at all or anything like that. But Eddie, leaves Earth 616 and returns to an alternate universe where he's talking with Danny Rojas, the character from Ted Lasso, obviously, the actor, and he is back in the Venom universe. And one thing that Venom says here, and I'm not obviously going to use the profanity, but Venom says, multiverse sucks. I think, especially after Deadpool and Wolverine, these two films were probably made around the same time, if not, Venom was made a little bit later. It's pointing to the fact that I think we're kind of done with this whole crossing over, or at least you're not going to say multiverse sucks, right? Because I think that was meant to be tongue-in-cheek and meant to tend to say, hey, we tried to do this multiverse stuff. I mean, literally Venom, in the post-credit scene of Venom Let There Be Carnage, was like, oh, Peter Parker, who's that? And that did not pan out. I think it was a clear sign that was like, for the time being, we're not going to, for the Venom universe at least, we're not going to cross them over. I think it's totally fine to have the symbiote in in Spider-Man 4 play a part, but I think that for the most part, they're just going to keep the two universes separate. And I don't think that necessarily means Spider-Man 4 isn't going to be multiversal, but I think that for the time being, the Venom universe is going to stay on its own. So that to me hints that we're not going to see Knull appear in the MCU. So I don't think that's what Kelly Marcel was referring to. So then I think the other obvious option becomes, is he just going to be the big bad of the Sony universe? And I think that is really what they had been building towards, honestly, because if you think about this, in their ideal world, right, the Sinister Six or whatever team they were trying to, have be there, Venom is kind of like the Sony universe's Iron Man, in the sense that he is supposed to be up in front. He's supposed to be the main character. And while Venom himself is dead, obviously there are going to be symbiotes and everything everywhere, all these different characters that they could follow, I suppose, all the different symbiotes. But I think the goal was for them to build a team where you have Venom, you have Morbius, Madam Web, Kraven the Hunter, and probably a couple more, and they're going to fight some kind of big bad. And it would make sense that the villain from, who has the most direct connection to Venom, because he is the central piece. They've made 3 Venom films, and they have not made any sequels to the other films for obvious reasons, box office and critical failure. But Venom was successful. And so I think the thinking is, okay, let's try to make this universe and let's try to have Knull be the villain. We even have, for whatever crazy dumb reason, we have Vulture in this universe now. So you have, 5 out of 6 members. If you want to do Sinister Six, you can just do 5. Doesn't matter. Number doesn't really matter, other than, the iconic title of being Sinister Six. But I think this is what, Sony had intended to happen. Now, the real question becomes, is this actually going to happen? And I'm going to say no. I think this iteration of the Sony universe is honestly kind of dead. I don't think, because I think that Sony will continue to make movies with Spider-Man adjacent characters. I think, though, for the time being, they are going to kind of kill this universe in an interesting sense of, how in the DCEU, right? At a certain point after Justice League, the universe was so disjointed that, yes, sure, Shazam is in the same universe as Superman, and Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom takes place in the same world as, Black Adam, but they never really refer to one another anymore. And I think that is probably the approach that the Sony universe is going to take. We'll see with Kraven the Hunter. For all we know, Knull is the main villain of Kraven the Hunter, which would be crazy. But for all we know, that's what's going to happen, right? But I think that for sure they would have wanted Knull to come back, but I just don't see that happening anymore. Honestly, what I think Sony would do, because they need to keep making these movies to retain the rights to Spider-Man, I think what they might be doing, honestly, is let's just focus on the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse characters. They might even make a Spider-Gwen movie, just like how they're making a Spider-Man noir movie with Nicolas Cage. They could get Haley Steinfeld to come and play Spider-Gwen. They could get, live-action Miles Morales movie going and maybe just focus on all that stuff going on. And maybe eventually Tom Holland crosses over into the Sony universe. But I just have a hard time believing that the original plan for Knull is what's going to actually happen in the future. But guys, let me know in the comments down below, after having seen Venom: The Last Dance, where do you think Knull is going to appear next? Do you think he's actually going to be the villain of Spider-Man 4, or do you think the plans have changed? Or do you think that he was going to be the villain of the Sony universe? Let me know in the comments down below. Let's talk now about some Star Wars, something that we haven't done, honestly, in a little bit, not since we talked about Sigourney Weaver joining the Mandalorian and Grogu movie, but there has been some news and some movement on the next slate of Star Wars movies. Some positive, some negative, and I think overall just pointing to even more lack of coherent vision over at Sony. So let's talk about all of this right now. So I wanted to give a little bit of an update on 3 movie projects that are going to be coming up here in the near future. The 3 movies that had been announced, and give some updates. Some good, like I said, some bad. And we'll talk about what this means for the Star Wars universe. So there were 3 movies that had been announced to be entering production in the Star Wars universe. The Mandalorian and Grogu, which was a continuation and perhaps the culmination of the Mandalorian TV show universe. We have the Rey movie, which takes place after episode 9, although whether or not this was episode 10 or not remains to be seen. Doesn't seem like it. Seems like it's going to be more standalone. But, the Rey Skywalker movie. And then we have the Dawn of the Jedi movie, which is going to be directed by James Mangold, going back into the origin story of the Jedi Order. So, updates that we've gotten recently. Turns out, Mandalorian and Grogu is done filming. And so, this movie, which will be coming out, I think, December 2025, it looks like it's coming. And that's amazing because it will end the drought of 6 years between Star Wars films. And while, I am somebody who does not love Mandalorian as much as other people, I enjoy it, and I enjoy some parts of it more than others. I personally I'm cautiously excited for this movie. I hope that in a 2-hour story movie format, it's going to be able to cut the filler parts of the show, because honestly, for me, that's part of the reason that I'm not the biggest fan of the show. Is just I feel there's too much fluff. There's too much filler in the show. And I'm hoping that because it's going to be tightened up in the story, we'll see, there's going to be just a continuous story, and we'll see what happens there. So the Mandalorian and Grogu movie is done filming. That is exciting. Okay, good news. I'm going to stick with the good news here. And James Mangold is saying the Dawn of the Jedi movie could start filming in 2025. That's also good news. Maybe, in fact, that movie will take the place of the Rey Skywalker movie, which was going to release in December 2026. We will talk about that. But first, the Dawn of the Jedi movie is going to film in 2025. Now, things have, directors and writers have said Star Wars movies were going to film, and then they didn't. So this isn't necessarily a guarantee of anything in particular, just because of the dysfunctional nature of what's going on with Star Wars. This is not a guarantee of anything at all. Just want to make that abundantly clear. That being said, it is still better news to hear this than hear the opposite of, oh, we haven't really gotten the story yet. We'll get there eventually. Because how many times have we heard that in the last few months? Taika Waititi's movie, gone. Michael Waldron's movie, gone. Kevin Feige's movie, which probably was the Michael Waldron movie, gone. All these things, we can hear all these promises made, but none of the promises have been kept. So yeah, just by having James Mangold say that there is going to be filming soon is not a guarantee of anything, but it is a better sign than not. So there is that. Very good sign there. But then finally, biggest piece of bad news here, the Rey movie has lost its writer, Stephen Knight, and it is unlikely now to make the December 2026 release date that it was going to originally. This is yet another sign that Lucasfilm has no idea what it's doing, especially with the main Star Wars timeline, because The Mandalorian and Grogu, it's doing its own thing. It's following up on the the success of the TV series and following up on that story. And Dawn of the Jedi looks like James Mangold is just completely doing his own thing, and it's a good thing. I would, I'd like more stories like that. I'd love a Knights of the Old Republic trilogy. I'd love, more stories just set in the way past or the way future. Anything like that would be great. This Rey Skywalker movie, though, it seems like they do not have a grasp of what's going on here, and that is supremely disappointing. So again, if we had any hope that there was any kind of, cohesiveness, continuity here, for the time being, because I do think we will get episode 10 eventually, but for the time being, it just seems like Lucasfilm is trying to throw spaghetti at a wall and see what sticks, and the Mandalorian and Grogu movie stuck. Looks like, fingers crossed, the Dawn of the Jedi movie is going to stick and or stuck. Ahsoka and Acolyte, were made, did not really stick the landings, but they were made. But then this Rey movie, the Rogue Squadron movie, Patty Jenkins, that was Patty Jenkins' movie, Kevin Feige and Michael Waldron's movie, the Benioff and Weiss trilogy, Rian Johnson's trilogy. Like, they're just trying to throw as much spaghetti against the wall. And I think Kathleen Kennedy is at the point where she's like, I don't really care if none of these happen. We'll just see what does happen. But I think that what it has done, it is that it has severely marred the reputation of Star Wars amongst the fans to where we're like, okay, show us what you got. Half of what you say you're going to give us is not what you give us. And then what you do give us divides the fan base. And I think that is really disappointing. I have not loved anything from Star Wars, honestly, since Rogue One. And that's disappointing. It's incredibly disappointing to me. It's been, 8 years almost since that has happened. And I'm disappointed with that. So here's hoping Skeleton Crew can turn it around. Here's hoping Mandalorian and Grogu can turn it around. Dawn of the Jedi sounds very interesting. So did The Acolyte. And The Acolyte, well, I am not a supreme hater of The Acolyte. I think it is very messy and has problems. I don't hate it as much as other people do, but it was still disappointing to me. Ahsoka was disappointing to me. I love the Clone Wars episode, but I love the Clone Wars, so it was appealing directly to my nostalgia, of course. Book of Boba Fett, even Andor, I really like Andor, but it perhaps is not my cup of tea necessarily, although I do really like Andor. Mandalorian, not a big fan of. Obi-Wan wasn't a big fan of. So just I'm hoping and waiting for Star Wars to deliver on the promise of the premise, because Star Wars is amazing, but I just haven't gotten anything to that extent that I'm hoping for, and nothing so far has united the fan base, not since Mandalorian season 1, and that is disappointing. So we'll see. We'll see what Star Wars films come out. We'll be getting Mandalorian and Grogu unless something catastrophic happens. Looks like we'll be getting the James Mangold film. But after that, who knows? And that's not a very fun place to be in, especially with a franchise like Star Wars. But guys, what do you think about this news? Do you think these two films are going to release? And do you think that the Rey Skywalker movie is ever going to come out? Let me know in the comments down below. All right, so we have some more Spider-Man 4 news. And this came out a little while ago, but I wanted to talk more, less about the news itself and more about what the implications are, because I think that this is really interesting. So Spider-Man 4 has officially been announced to be directed by Destin Daniel Cretton, and Tom Holland is on board, and everything is good to go. They're going to start filming in summer of 2025, and we have a release date now. Spider-Man 4 is officially going to come out after Avengers Doomsday. We'll talk about that in just a second. And before Avengers Secret Wars. It's going to come out July 24th, 2026. Now, that's news. And if this was just a breaking news podcast, then that would be the end of the segment. But I wanted, as always, to do some deep dives and do some analysis here and talk about what this means for the story of Spider-Man 4. So here's the thing. There are a few avenues that this film could go into, even before we knew the release date. Because I had thought maybe there's a chance. If they filmed early enough in 2025, turns out they're going to film in summer, so there's no chance of this now. I thought there was a chance with an expedited timeline. They could have filmed in January to April, something like that. The film could have been released December 2025. That's not going to happen. Because I thought, how in the world are you going to make a Spider-Man 4 film come out before Avengers Doomsday? So here's the situation, right? Spider-Man 4 could very well take place in the aftermath of Doomsday, because Spider-Man is almost certainly, it would be asinine if Spider-Man, the character, did not appear in Avengers Doomsday. He is basically one of your most guaranteed hits. The character, the movies, the franchise, everything like that. So Spider-Man is going to be in Avengers Doomsday. I can almost guarantee it. In fact, there have been reports that Tom Holland is going to be filming Avengers Doomsday. So Spider-Man, the character, is going to be in Avengers Doomsday. There is a scenario in which Spider-Man 4 takes place in the post-Doomsday world. What that looks like, we can talk about in just a second. The other scenario is that Spider-Man is in Avengers Doomsday, but Spider-Man himself, the Spider-Man 4 story, will take place before Avengers Doomsday. I don't necessarily know what the point of that would be. I mean, prequels are fine. You know, and Ant-Man and the Wasp kind of worked in that sense, and Captain Marvel worked in that sense, because those two characters were not in Avengers Infinity War. So the real curiosity was, where have you been, right? I don't think it works as well if Spider-Man shows up in Avengers Doomsday and everyone remembers him again, and he just kind of winks at the camera and goes, you'll have to watch my movie to find out why, and then Spider-Man 4 is all about the spell being broken and whatnot. I don't think that is really a good approach. So really, those are the two options, unless there's some weird third wacky thing that happens where, I don't know, something wild is going on. It takes place in the future. I don't even know. But it looks like the two options we have here are Spider-Man 4 is going to take place in the post-Doomsday world, and Spider-Man 4 is going to be a prequel to Avengers Doomsday. I am going to go out on a limb and say that it is now very likely that Spider-Man 4 is going to take place in a post-Doomsday world, because I think that like I mentioned before, I don't think it's very plausible, and it's a very good idea to have, you know, Spider-Man 4 be a prequel to Doomsday when you have Spider-Man in Avengers Doomsday. There could be news that Tom Holland is not going to be in Avengers Doomsday, in which case maybe it's more plausible, but I don't see that as the case. So then the question becomes, how does a post-Doomsday world, not knowing what it is, right, but how is a post-Doomsday world, how does that affect Spider-Man 4? And I think we're making a lot of presumptions here, right? Because maybe in a post-Doomsday world, it's not so different, right? Maybe at the end of Avengers Doomsday, it's just kind of setting the stage for Secret Wars. Instead of, you know, in Avengers Infinity War, when the entire world was changed and you had to address these things in a post-Infinity War movie, I think that, you know, Avengers Doomsday, it's very possible that at the end of the movie, they kind of defeat Doom, but Doom is sort of setting the stage for the Void to become Battleworld. And it's not actually happening, but Spider-Man just kind of returns to New York until the beginning of Secret Wars, right? Where, you know, at the end of Spider-Man 4, the whole world flips over and he's sent to the Void, which is Battleworld. I don't know, something like that. I think that it is a presumption that the entire universe is gone and it turns into Battleworld at the end of Doomsday, because it's just as likely that that's not the case. So I think that it's totally fine, actually, to have that happen. Now, it would be interesting to see how seriously the events of Avengers Doomsday affect the events of Spider-Man 4, because even in a film like the first Avengers, where everything wraps up nicely and whatnot, the events of the Avengers affect Iron Man 3. So too with Thor the Dark World, where Loki, who is the villain of the Avengers, is, you know, the beginning of Thor the Dark World is he's sent to prison at the beginning of Thor the Dark World. Cap 4, not so much, but Guardians of the Galaxy, not so much. But you know what I mean, right? What ramifications is Doomsday going to have on Spider-Man 4? I'm not entirely sure, but it seems safe to say that it's going to have some effect on Spider-Man 4. I would argue that even if Spider-Man, you know, the second MCU Spider-Man would have taken place after Infinity War, I think you could have done that, honestly. Sure, you would have to address the fact that, you know, if Spider-Man had lived, right? I'm sure you would have had to address the fact that, hey, everyone disappeared. It's really sad. But Spider-Man could have had a street level adventure in that 5-year period between Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, for example, right? I think that addressing the fact that, you know, this is taking place in a post-Doomsday world will have to happen. But what that looks like, short of literally nothing existing except the Void and except Battleworld, I think that there are plenty of opportunities to tell a Spider-Man 4 story that aren't so constrained by whatever happens in Doomsday. But again, I just don't think we're going to have a very good idea of what that looks like. And they're going to have a very, very tricky marketing campaign to not spoil what happens at the end of Doomsday, just like how with the marketing campaign of Spider-Man Far From Home, they had a very tricky job of not spoiling what happened at the end of Avengers Endgame. So we'll see. We'll see how they handle it. And I think that that's an entirely different conversation that we can have in the future. Obviously, all these things are such a long way away. We don't even know what the story of Doomsday is going to be. We don't even know who's going to be in Avengers Doomsday. So this is a conversation we can have much, much later. But still, it's something that Sony will have to navigate as they market Spider-Man 4 in light of the fact that it comes out 2 months after Avengers Doomsday. So we'll have to see about that. But guys, let me know. In light of this news, Spider-Man 4 is releasing 2 months after Avengers Doomsday on July 24th, 2026, and Avengers Doomsday releases in May of 2026. What do you think that means for the story of Spider-Man 4? Do you think it will affect it significantly? Not at all. Do you think it'll be a prequel to Doomsday? Do you think it'll take place after Doomsday? Would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. All right, so there's a new MCU rumor that's come out recently, and as you guys know, I've talked about this before on the YouTube channel, on the podcast, but I don't like to talk about things as though they're news if they come from scoops, because again, I think that scoopers have been wrong far too many times for me to accurately do that. And I really just want to talk about what I think is true and what I think is actually going to happen. So, even if Marvel or Star Wars or DC or whatever doesn't actually confirm something, if the Hollywood Reporter, Variety, Deadline, if they all report that, then I'm basically going to take it to the bank. But if a scooper, I'm not going to name names, but if a scooper reports something, I'm not necessarily going to take it as fact. However, just as a fun exercise, I've been doing this on the channel recently, and it's been fun. I think it's been fun to just speculate. It's always fun to do hypotheticals, even if they'll never happen. But I thought, why don't we take a second here? There's been a rumor recently that Marvel is fast-tracking a Midnight Suns movie. Okay, it is what it is. I personally would really like to see the Midnight Suns, which I'll explain why in just a second. But in today's, or at least for today's segment here on the Access Blockbusters pod, what I thought we'd do is I'd like to run through what I would like the roster to be for the Midnight Suns. So if they are, in fact, doing a Midnight Suns movie in the MCU, and granted, it could come out at any time. It could come out in 5 years, and then the roster might be completely different. I'm just going to assume the movie is going to come out tomorrow. I can snap my fingers, no pun intended, and the movie will just come out. And so I wanted to build, based on the characters that have been in the MCU thus far, I wanted to build my own roster for the Midnight Suns. I'm probably missing someone very, very important, but I think I've gotten everyone here who I think fits my general criteria for who should be on the Midnight Suns. So here's the deal. For those of you who don't know the Midnight Suns, and I don't know everything there is to know about the Midnight Suns, but here's the general gist that I'm going off of. The Midnight Suns, to me, it's not quite the same as Thunderbolts. It's not quite the same as Dark Avengers. They're not the goody two-shoes Avengers, even though obviously the Avengers have some of their darker moments as well. But they are more of a mystical team. They're going to deal with more mystical threats, supernatural threats, if you will. And they are kind of built out of these characters who are working in the shadows, working with mystical elements, mythical elements, magic even, supernatural elements, etc., etc. So that is the basis of what I'm going off of. These are characters in the MCU, for me at least, that, don't necessarily belong in a traditional Avengers team, although they could appear in there. I would argue actually a few members of this team should be in Avengers movies, still. But I think that they are more suited to be in a darker film, in a film more about mysticism and supernatural. And also, I think the other thing that I was talking about earlier, that I was referencing earlier, is that these are characters that I just don't think fit very well in other parts of the MCU. And the reason that I'm bringing a lot of these characters together is just because I think it's time that we give them a purpose outside of their one appearance in their one movie or their one show. Or even, not having appeared at all, in certain cases. So what we're going to do here is I've built this roster of the Midnight Suns out of characters that have appeared in the MCU previously. So sorry, no Ghost Rider, no, actually don't even know who else would be on the but no Ghost Rider, for example. No characters that have not been in the MCU before. And I'm also just strictly talking about Earth 616, although for some of these characters, who even knows where they where their stories take place, but we're just going to assume everything not explicitly in the multiverse. So Deadpool and Wolverine, for example, or Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, nothing like that. These are characters that have been in the MCU proper, quote unquote. Now, hint, hint, wink, wink, I will, by appearing in the MCU, I literally mean they could have had a voice cameo. If that doesn't give away one of the members, I don't know what will. And this isn't meant to be the most realistic thing ever. Obviously, based on that, you probably know what I'm talking about. This is just me saying, okay, if Kevin Feige were to say, I'm giving you free reign. Give me every single member of the Midnight Suns you'd want based on what we have set up in the MCU before, and I'm going to make it. And I'm going to go, great, done. So here is my roster for the Midnight Suns with that in mind. Number 1, and this is in no particular order, I just wrote these down. Moon Knight. I think Moon Knight is the perfect character. In fact, one of the perfect leaders of the Midnight Suns. I mean, I could totally imagine, because just as how Florence Pugh is leading the Thunderbolts, right, as the lead actress, I think that Oscar Isaac could do a great job leading a Midnight Suns movie if that's what they were going to do. And also, we just need to explore this character more. Honestly, we do. He's so cool. But he, I think, was given the short end of the stick in his own series. Personally, I think there was just so much more to explore. It almost felt like the first half of the season, much like Loki Season 1 did, and then Loki Season 2 filled it in. So I'm hoping we're going to get a Moon Knight Season 2, but I'd love to see him on the Midnight Suns. Similarly, Scarlet Scarab, I'd love to see Layla there as well. I think that having them be a team, a mini team within the Midnight Suns would be really cool. I think that Columway. I never know how to pronounce her last name, but the actress who played her did a good job. And I think that, having those two together come from the Moon Knight side of the universe would be really fun. Would be really, really fun. They can also, it can also be having a duo of, they did a lot of archaeological digging and tomb raiding and stuff like that. That could be kind of fun for a Midnight Suns movie. So those are the first two characters. Third and fourth and fifth characters actually come from the same project. And this project has been kind of forgotten about in the MCU. It's not a show. It's not a movie. It is a special presentation. Let's get all the Werewolf by Night characters in there because I think they would fit in amazingly. So obviously, get Werewolf by Night. I think his name is Jack Russell. Get him. He would be great. He would fit in with the mystical side of the MCU super well. The again, vampires and werewolves and, Egyptian gods. It's all fitting together really well. I think that this is all good vibes so far. And Elsa Bloodstone, I think that she, Lauren Donnelly, I believe is her name, the actress's name. She did a great job. I think that it would be just really fun to, again, just have characters, not just one character, but multiple characters coming from different pockets of the universe. I think that's part of the reason of what made the first Avengers so fun is that not only did you see Tony, but also Pepper was there. And also Coulson was there from the other MCU movies. And Nick Fury was there. It's just about seeing all these characters that we haven't seen come back, be a big part of the MCU moving forward, which I think is really fun. Speaking of Elsa Bloodstone and Werewolf by Night, Man-Thing. Man-Thing would be just such a fun character where it's kind of like the Groot of the group, right? Only Werewolf by Night knows what he's saying, but everyone else would just kind of think, is he dangerous? Is he friendly? And obviously he turns out to be a pretty big softie. That was one of the big fun twists of Werewolf by Night, and I think that would be really fun as well. So we have 5 characters already, but I think we're building a very solid roster here. Moon Knight, Layla, Scarlet Scarab, as their superhero name is, Werewolf by Night, Elsa Bloodstone, and Man-Thing. The next character is that aforementioned cameo. If we're not going to get that Blade movie, let's get a Mahershala Ali into the Midnight Suns. And I don't even think this is completely out of the realm of possibility. Maybe if they are fast-tracking this Midnight Suns movie, and at this point, it seems like it's very possible that it could come up before Blade. So maybe they're like, Mahershala, we really still want you. We know that you're probably going to drop out of this project, out of the MCU very soon. Why don't you do Midnight Suns? You can be one of the co-leads with Oscar Isaac. That'd be really fun, right? And then you can get your own Blade movie while we figure that all out. I don't know. Maybe not. Probably not. Honestly, I just doubt that he's going to be in the movie, in his own Blade movie or in Midnight Suns. But we can dream. I think again, it's just really fun to tap into the whole werewolf angle, and then obviously now you have a vampire, half vampire, and I think that'd be really cool. Speaking of Blade, I think Black Knight would also be a very fun character to have here. He's with the ebony blade, you can be tracking down mystical threats here and there. In my rewrite of the MCU Phase 4, I actually had Black Knight and Blade be a part of the Werewolf by Night show, or special presentation rather, where instead of all the other random hunters, you actually had MCU characters hunting, like Moon Knight and Blade and Black Knight. And I think that it would be fun to get Dane Whitman back here. I don't know if we're ever going to see Kit Harington back in the MCU, but still, it'd be really fun. Now, we're going to get one more pick here that I think is somewhat conventional with the Midnight Suns roster, and then I'm going to give you 2 that I think are for fun, but I think would fit pretty well in this roster as well. So the next and final pick that's sort of conventional, so to speak, is Agatha Harkness. Now, for those of you who have not been keeping up with Agatha all along, totally fine. We're not going to spoil anything here for the show. So let's just assume, I'm just going to assume pre-Agatha all along, whatever happens to her in the finale, I don't know. But we're just going to, for the sake of not spoiling anything for Agatha all along. As I'm recording this, I haven't even seen the finale yet, so I don't even know if she makes it out of the finale or not. But let's just assume she does. Agatha Harkness, right? I think that she probably would be one of the more powerful users, powerful super anti-villain heroes in this team. But it'd be really fun to have her around and have Catherine Hahn be sort of a chaos agent in this team as well. Now, I'm going to give you two names now, just kind of as bonus picks, because I think that the roster that I've constructed so far, Moon Knight, Scarlet Scarab, Werewolf by Night, Elsa Bloodstone, Man-Thing, Blade, Black Knight, Agatha Harkness, pretty conventional, right? I think that if you stopped right there, really solid team, bunch of great actors in there, would love to see it. I'm going to give you 2 more, though, that probably is wish fulfillment, but honestly, I think that they would be kind of fun additions. The next one here is Shang-Chi. And I think people would be like, wait, that's crazy. He's way too overpowered. He is probably going to be one of the more powerful characters on this roster. But, I mean, let's not underestimate. Moon Knight he has the backing of an Egyptian god. Agatha Harkness is quite powerful. Black Knight with the Ebony Blade could be very powerful, although he probably doesn't even know how to use it. But it's not like this character is just filled with, characters that just punch people all the time. Like, these are powerful characters, and I think Shang-Chi, martial arts, and I think that the Ten Rings can tap into a kind of mysticism. Obviously, yes, this is part of me saying I want to see Simu Liu back in the MCU. Of course it is, but still, I think that it'd be fun, to have Shang-Chi in the mix and kind of dealing with these characters. I don't think stylistically, in terms of tone, obviously Shang-Chi is a little lighter of a film, but, I think it'd be still fun to see him with the Midnight Suns. And my last bonus pick, because of course it is Wong. We have Agatha Harkness as the Chaos Magic user. It'd be also fun to just have the Sorcerer Supreme Wong just tagging along as well for the ride. So that is my roster for the Midnight Suns movie, the hypothetical Midnight Suns movie. Let me know in the comments down below. Do you think it's ridiculous? Do you think it's fun? It's just, it's totally for fun for me. But I'd like to know, if you had to pick from the existing MCU characters, who would you pick to be on the Midnight Suns and why? Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty, guys, let's talk Penguin episode 6. And can you believe, guys, this show is almost over? It's crazy. At least season 1, if they're going to do a season 2. This has been such a wild ride of a show. I've been enjoying this entire journey that we've been on for over 6 weeks, because remember, the first episode came out on a Thursday, I believe, and then, or Wednesday or Thursday, and then the next episode came out the next Sunday, about 10 days later. And so we've been here for over 6 weeks covering this show, and it's just been awesome. So thank you guys for joining me on these episode breakdowns, episode spoiler discussions. I know that they don't come out in a super, they don't come out, right after the episode airs, because just by nature of, again, how I record and edit the podcast, but I still have been enjoying this so much, and hopefully these episode spoiler discussions are really fun recaps for you guys as we head into the next episode of The Penguin, which it's always a good time. It's always a good time. So let's talk Penguin episode 6. This is going to be a full spoiler discussion. If you have not seen The Penguin episode 6, make sure to just save this segment, save the podcast for later. And without further ado, let's get into it. So we are opening here. We are opening this show, and we are transitioning to winter because, this is actually something that surprised me a little bit, because I had kind of thought, well, we got to keep going with the show, the momentum. And one would think that a time jump would be something of a momentum killer, but I actually think that it's really smart because of obviously the practical reason. You needed to grow the mushrooms, right? So it needed to take some time, but also I just think it was a nice little transition piece. It kind of jarred you out of the routine of the show and put you in a different place, which I think is cool. And also the fact that you have Penguin kind of narrating this beginning part where he's talking to his crew members, and he's talking to them about the mob families. And you got the Falcones and the Gigantes over here and the Maronis, but we are running the underground. It's really cool to see, especially after the end of last episode where they were just getting started in the underground, that now the underground is fully operational. So again, really wasn't expecting the time jump, but it just makes sense because the mushrooms, right? It just makes sense for the mushrooms, but also stylistically with this show and with this story, it works really well. You also see now that Penguin is something of a kingpin, right? He's something of a true crime boss, because now he has a full operation and it's solely under him. And what's also really sad, and it lends to the character arc that we see, the character progression that we see throughout the rest of this episode, is that Vic's stutter is kind of gone at the beginning of this episode. It comes back a little bit, but he's so bought in at this point, especially at the beginning, and he wavers throughout the episode, but at the beginning of the episode, one of the first things that I noticed was that his stutter was basically gone. It came back when he started talking about Sal Maroni and Sofia Gigante, but still, it's just notable that he is so bought in, and I think this character is only going to get darker from here, which is so sad, especially after episode 3. I think if we were to rewatch this entire season now with knowing what we know, and we haven't even seen the last 2 episodes, but just knowing what we know, it's going to be so sad to see the character arc for Vic. And if he ends up becoming Victor Zsasz or whoever else, it doesn't really matter, because he's just such a great character, no matter if he's just an original character or if he's Victor Zsasz or someone else. It's just going to be such a sad character arc to watch in hindsight if we ever do a rewatch of this show. But it's so sad for Victor, and it's also kind of sad also how concerned Oz is with his own legacy, right? He keeps telling Vic, we're going to do this and people are going to know who we are. And again, there's this twisted, dark killer, right? This is who the Penguin is, but also there's a deep level of sadness, I think, here too, and just need to be loved. You see that with his mother, and need for that kind of attention. He thinks society has forgotten about him. And that's, I think, part of the reason why he wants a legacy. And he started the show talking about that gangster that everyone adored in his neighborhood, and now he really wants to be that kind of person. We then transition to Sophia and Julian. That's yikes, really dark and messed up. Also, though there have been theories, I've heard some theories that maybe Dr. Julian Rush is not real. Maybe he is a kind of Hugo Strange figure. Not entirely sure what to make of him, honestly. He hasn't been in the show for very long, but every single time he does appear, it's just more and more messed up and twisted as well. Also, it's revealed that Sal Maroni is living in the Falcone/Gigante house. Again, very disconcerting because everyone who lived there had died just recently, or I guess, I don't know, depending on how big the time jump was between episode 5 and episode 6, but still, he's living in a ghost house, basically. And it is also just really disquieting to see a mob boss just cooking. It's something you don't see in shows, in movies, this super villainous characters doing completely normal things, and then you just have a scene where Sal and Sophia are eating dinner. And Clancy Brown is so good because he just allows that emotion to spill out of him. He's talking about the death of his son, right? Something that is so tragic and so sad, even for somebody like him. And he just lets that anger spill out. And that's really sad in a strange sense, We transition back to the other focal part of this episode because, the episode ends with Victor Aguilar right now, and Oz's mom. And Oz's mom is the other big part of this episode here. And she's not doing well. She's really not doing well. And we get a taste of that here, but then we'll see more of that as the episode progresses. Sophia, on the other hand, is back to hanging people. She's trying to draw Oz out and get him, because now he's selling this bliss to everybody. And it's apparently causing a lot of ruckus. And so Sophia is basically saying, if you buy bliss from anybody, because bliss is Oz's, it was Sophia's originally, but now it's Oz's. If you buy this bliss, you're going to be in huge trouble. And I think that's a really interesting move, right, in terms of this whole chess game that's going on here. But then it's interesting because Oz counters that by saying, okay, everyone gets free samples, everyone's going to be hooked on it, and it's not going to matter what Sophia does, because if you're hooked, and it's over, right? It's all over. They're going to want the bliss anyways, no matter what. Then we see Squid, and I just knew, I said this in the last episode, spoiler discussion if you haven't checked that out, I knew that something with Squid was going to happen. I knew it was going to be really bad. I actually had thought that he was going to kill Oz's mom. It turns out that that's probably going to be Sophia, and that's also going to be tragic because we'll talk about this in just a second, how Oz's mom tells him to kill her eventually, which is just heartbreaking, awful, awful scene. Just everything about that scene is just so hard to watch. But I think that even though Oz's mom tells him to do that, I still somehow think the bigger tragedy, honestly, will be Oz seeing his mother go not on her own terms. We'll get to that though in just a second. But it's it's interesting because Squid shows up here and he's kind of that antagonist, the mini antagonist for Victor, right? Because Oz is dealing with his own things and then Victor is dealing with his own things as well. So then Sophia and Sal go to raid Oz's old apartment, and it's interesting, they think his mother's dead, and obviously Sophia finds out that his mother's alive, so that's going to be a big part of episode 7. I'm sure there's going to be a huge confrontation there. And then they're going after the girl that he was with. I always forget her name. I don't think they rarely say her name, if ever, and so I always forget her name, but they're going after the woman that Oz was with, and that's obviously going to play a big part in how Sophia ends up seeing Oz, or being at Crown Point later on. But first, we get back to, I think, just, again, one of the best acted, best written, best performed, and really hardest, one of the hardest scenes to watch in the show, which is Oz's mother coming out of the tub and telling him to kill her when she basically loses her mind. So sad. It's heartbreaking because, again, what the show constantly confronts you with is this idea that these are not good people. These are bad people who are going through real human emotions. I mean, again, bad people, but there are so many loved ones out there, people dealing with loved ones who are going through dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and it's just so difficult to watch. And I find, I think that's the genius of this show, is bringing these real human problems to light in a way, in a gangster show, in a mob horror, which I think is just so incredible. And again, I said this last episode as well, last spoiler discussion, that Oz's mom is the focal point, and when she dies, I think that there's just going to be another level where even if Oz is eventually the one who has to kill her, and he begrudgingly has accepted that, although we'll see. We'll see if he does that. I think that there is still another level where he could snap even further, and he could be even more vicious and brutal, and we'll see him in the Batman 2. By the way, if he shows up in the Batman Part 2 and he is one of the villains, how hard is it going to be to watch? Because we love to... how do I put this? We don't love the character necessarily, but I think we've all been loving watching the show, and it's just part of the journey of watching this fascinating character unravel before our very eyes. And watching his escapades and seeing all the trouble that he gets himself into and how he gets himself out of it. That I legitimately think if Robert Pattinson's Batman is fighting the Penguin, there's going to be this weird, conflicting thing. Not because I want, this murderer, mob boss to be winning, right? Or anything like that. But because I think that it's been such a fun ride to watch this show. And I'd be really conflicted. I'd be like, Batman, I mean, you can put him in Arkham, but... oh man, if don't get rid of Penguin, I want to see season 2. So anyways, I think that'll be kind of interesting if he shows up in the Batman Part 2. Also, another really interesting thing here, again, just using the dynamics of Gotham City, speaking of Batman, to the show's advantage is that it's cold and Crown Point is not getting any heat. And so the heat coming back is a big deal, right? It's a big part of what the show is going for. Oz is intimidating the guy whose job it is to turn on the heat. And it's again part of that socioeconomic argument that the show is trying to make about just the rich neighborhoods getting richer and the poor neighborhoods getting poorer. Then we get the other just brutal moment here in this episode where Victor has to kill Squid. I mean, the second that they were confronted with one another at the beginning of the episode, I kind of saw that one coming, but just killed him in cold blood. Squid is a very, very bad person, but just to see Victor killing anybody in cold blood, and the fact that his next lines are "I'm sorry," as if that would do anything, is heartbreaking. It is so heartbreaking, and this is Victor's turn. I mean, it really is the focal point for this character. I know that he's been doing things through the past few episodes that have been getting him to this point, but this is truly the focal point for this character. Then we head back. So now Sophia is talking to the woman that Oz has been seeing. And I think the argument about not being black and white, that the woman makes about, hey, you were born into riches, and just because, you see everything in black and white, but that's not how it is. But then Sophia flipping it back on her and saying, well, I'm not that anymore, right? You think I'm the hangman. And she's like, well, are you now? And that's a question that Sophia can't really answer because she is the hangman now. She is, it's interesting, this whole thing, especially watching that Arkham episode, which I still think I think episodes 3 and 4 have just set the bar so high that episodes 5 and 6, to me personally, have not been that good, but they've been so good anyways. And so, but anyways, remembering back to episode 4, when Sophia, who did not kill anybody originally, was then labeled the hangman, but comes out of prison and then becomes the hangman. It's this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy that I think is so fascinating to watch with these characters. It's such good writing. And it makes this whole argument about what's black and white, what's nuanced, and what's the truth. It makes it all so much more interesting. But Sophia threatens to kill her, and I think she kind of sees something in her that makes her realize that she's not really the problem here, and she's really after Oz. But then the woman gives Oz up, and at first I was kind of like, why did she do that? But I think that there are a couple things at play here that make me kind of buy it. Is number one is that she's grateful, obviously, that she's not dead, but also that I think she realized, Oz had been lying to her, as Sophia told her, and so now there's a little bit of spite that maybe she's not angry towards Oz, but she's like, yep, fair game, and we'll see where that goes from there. Obviously, that leads to Sophia heading to Crown Point there. So then Vic, meets Oz again after killing Squid, and that scene as well is just, Oz is telling him, hey, you're strong, and that's so sad because he just killed a person. And saying it gets easier was such a brutally devastating line here. And it probably will for Vic. And, the justification that they both give is that you're protecting people you love, and it's just going to get worse. I'm sure Victor will have more kills later on. And that's not going to be good. So, and then Oz has this thing called the Golden Summit where he's just throwing them beers. And at first, well, I'm still a little iffy on this because on the one hand, sure, I think Oz has the chops to get out of the situation, right? I think Oz is able to do that. But also, they could have just killed him at any second. I don't know what the downside is of them killing Oz, other than maybe they kind of think, okay, so Sophia is going to come after us and whatever, but there are a lot of them. So I don't know. I was kind of conflicted about that, but I buy it. I buy the fact that Oz is like, yeah, no, but we need to team up. So it's basically, what I think this episode is doing so brilliantly is setting up the end game, right? One of the best things about this show has been the pacing. This show knows exactly when to rise in temperature, to kind of slow the pace down, like in last week's episode. Although again, I mean, I say slow down the pace. Somebody lit on fire, so, still has explosive moments in there. But the show knows exactly when to set up what, and now it's setting up the real endgame. Because I think we got to see that a little bit last episode with Sal and Sophia teaming up, but this is the real endgame, I think. Oz and the rest of the smaller, quote-unquote, smaller gang leaders versus the Maronis and the Falcones or the Gigantes, the traditional kingpins of Gotham City. And then, as if the episode couldn't end on a sadder or more harrowing note, Sophia is watching Vic and Francis dance, and that's how the episode ends. So guys, this episode, I think, it had that penguin mix, right? It had the penguin mix of beautifully slow, quiet, and slow is not a bad thing, by the way. It's just slow as in quieter scenes between characters like Sophia and Sal having dinner, Francis talking to Oz. Then you had some, it's not even action. I don't know. I don't even want to say action. I don't think action needs to be in a show like this all the time, especially in episodes like this, but just, scenes where things are moving, right? Things are happening with Squid and with Vic and with Oz and the Golden Summit. Things are coming to a head. And then there are these beautiful tension points, as well as some just, again, beautifully written, kind of terrifying, horrifying scenes, like when Oz's mother tells him to kill her and all that kind of stuff. It's such a good show, guys. It's such a good show. Like I've been saying all this time, this kind of show wouldn't have been my cup of tea. And it's just so well told. It's such a great story, and I'm so on board. I'm so happy to have been watching this show. But guys, let me know in the comments down below, what did you think about episode 6 of The Penguin? Was this your favorite episode? Maybe your least favorite episode? Let me know in the comments down below. And what are you looking forward to most with episodes 7 and 8? Let me know in the comments. All right, so what is turning out to be a jam-packed week of movie and television news? We have one bit of Star Wars news to talk about here. It is the second and presumably final trailer for the new Star Wars show, Skeleton Crew. So I'm just going to give my quick thoughts on the trailer, not too in-depth, but just talking about the vibes and what I hope for this series as we head into December soon. It's already November. That's crazy. And this series will be out in just over a month, so it's pretty exciting. But the first trailer for Skeleton Crew came out, I think, maybe less than a month ago, so they're really ramping up the marketing here. And what I said in that segment, what I said in that podcast episode was that, the trailer has promise. I think that there are some fun elements here, but I think what this show will hinge upon, at least for me personally, is the child acting, because it's always dangerous to hinge an entire show's reputation, entire show's success upon actors that are children. And that's no knock against some, really fantastic child actors out there, right? But it's kind of understandable. You can't place too high of an expectation on kids that are 8, 9, 10, it looks like from this trailer. Maybe a little older, maybe not. But, it's always a dangerous proposition just because you don't know, right? You just don't know. And I'm sure they went through a rigorous casting process here. But the vibes of the trailer are very upbeat. They're very, kind of 80s retro kind of vibes in Star Wars, which I think is fun in a different way. And you see a little bit more of Jude Law. You see a lot more of the kids and their dynamic, which I think is fun. And, I think what John Watts had been saying before is that this is going to be less of a kiddie show and more of harkening back to the 80s, right? With E.T., with Goonies, and even some Stranger Things vibes. And Stranger Things, because I didn't grow up in the 80s, but Stranger Things is what I resonate most with, in that you have child actors, right? The entire show hinges upon child actors with a couple adult actors in David Harbour and Winona Ryder. And, they're great, right? David Harbour and Winona Ryder. But for the most part, the show rides on the success of Finn Wolfhard, Millie Bobby Brown, Gaten Matarazzo, Caleb McLaughlin, and Noah Schnapp, right? That's what especially the first season when they were really young kids. And so if these child actors, and it looks like they have some chemistry, it looks like it's charming, I like the scene, it's a funny scene where Jude Law is like, take the wheel, and the kid's like, really? And it's, I think that kind of thing is fun. And I think most of all, what I am hopeful for after watching this trailer is seeing that it looks like this show will have more of an emotional heart than maybe other Star Wars projects. It's about kids getting home. and they're going to go on their adventures and whatnot. But I think if you keep the story simple, grounded, and emotional in that sense, where it's like it's about kids finding their way home. They meet a Jedi, it looks like, and a Force user, and it looks like they're going to go on all these hijinks and adventures with space pirates and whatnot. I think that is actually the making of a really decent show. Now, Star Wars, in fairness, has not had a lot of success on Disney Plus. And for me personally, it's a little bit hard to get too excited about anything Star Wars on Disney Plus. I mean, I liked a little bit of Ahsoka. I mean, especially the Hayden Christensen episode, but it didn't factor into the story too much, And I enjoyed parts of The Acolyte, which I know might be heinous to some of you. That's fine. I enjoyed some of The Acolyte, and I like Andor a lot. I like parts of The Mandalorian a lot. I just have some problems with the overall story, especially season 3, of course. But a lot of people had problems with season 3. Book of Boba Fett, not great. Obi-Wan Kenobi is it's a little middling, which is disappointing just given the premise of the show and having Darth Vader fight Obi-Wan again. So yeah, Star Wars on Disney Plus has just not been the most successful. And really what I'm looking for is less about let's expand the canon and let's get all the Rebels crew back, which is fine. I mean, it's fine. You have all the Rebels crew back now pretty much with Ezra and Hera, Sabine, Zeb. So it's fine. Like, do whatever you want with that. As somebody who wasn't a huge fan of Rebels, that's not really the selling point for me. But more so, at this point, just get back to basics, right? Just get back to basics and let's tell a good story. And John Watts, by the way, director of the 3 Spider-Man films in the original Spider-Man MCU trilogy, I should say, with the 4th Spider-Man film coming out now. It's, I have a lot of faith in him because he has been so steady and so solid in working in big budget tentpole films. I mean, he handled the single biggest comic book character, I would argue, in history. And he did those 3 films to massive success. The first film, obviously, making something like $800 million. The next one making $1 billion. The next one almost making $2 billion. And on top of that, all 3 films being critically successful. On top of that, all 3 films tying together into the MCU. On top of that, all 3 films having a really solid story in there. And all 3 films also being released in the span of 6 years, basically. That's incredible. So I have a lot of faith in John Watts. I just can't get myself to be too excited about Star Wars, but I'm cautiously optimistic based on this second trailer for Skeleton Crew. So guys, I ask you, are you excited about Skeleton Crew? What did you think about this second trailer? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Let me know in the comments down below. All right, guys, it is time to close out the book here on the Access Blockbusters pod for now on Agatha All Along. This is going to be a full spoiler discussion of episodes 8 and episode 9 of Agatha All Along, as well as some wrap-up thoughts here at the very end about how I felt about the series as a whole, and perhaps just some vague insights into how it would stack up with some other MCU shows in my opinion. Eventually, I'll be doing a more formalized ranking. Maybe even at the end of the year, I'll do just a yearly ranking of the MCU, re-ranking, blind ranking, something like that. But for now, this is what we got. We got Agatha All Along. So if you have not seen the last 2 episodes or the entire series of Agatha All Along, just make sure to save this segment for later and come back to it once you have seen those episodes. Let's dive in to Agatha All Along. So here's the gist on the series. I always like to give a little bit of context because there are always new viewers here. You can skip ahead if you've been watching the channel for some time, but there are always some new viewers here, and so I want to just give some context as to how I feel about previous episodes. I also want to preface this by saying, because a lot of people talk to me in the comments, which, by the way, love to hear your guys' thoughts. Make sure to keep commenting and keep the discussion going. It's the best part of this YouTube channel. But some people were commenting on the last episode where I said, Episode 7 was awesome. I loved Episode 7. But some other people were like, wait, I don't understand. How did you not like the previous episodes? This show has been so good. To which I say, that's awesome. I love that so many people are connecting with the show in such a way that it's really resonating with them. And I think that's awesome. Me personally, and you can go check out all the other spoiler discussions I've done for Agatha All Along, the show has not necessarily clicked for me. I don't think it is quote unquote bad or whatever that even means. I also did another video podcast about why I think, films and TV art is so personal and subjective. So even to call it bad it doesn't even make sense to me. But, it just wasn't clicking to me. And I understand it's not because it's cringy or whatever. It's more just because the vibe that they were going for, the more campy nature of some of the previous episodes and the trials and whatnot, it wasn't really clicking with me. And just to recap, I thought episodes 1 and 2 were pretty good, honestly. I thought episode 3 had some promise and it executed pretty well on this format. But I also said in that spoiler discussion that I knew if they kept going on with these trials, that for me personally, it would get old pretty quickly. And it did. Episodes 4 and 5 were just not for me personally. Those were the trials with the Agatha trial and the Alice trial. Personally, just not for me. But then episode 6 comes along, and episode 6 is about Billy Maximoff. And that I thought was a pretty solid episode, just getting to explore the backstory. It was almost like episode 4 of WandaVision. For those of you who don't know, the showrunner of WandaVision is the showrunner of Agatha all along. So a lot of parallels, a lot of similarities here. We see a lot of them actually, even in these final 2 episodes. And then episode 7 just turned it on. And episode 7 was like, oh, you thought episode 6 was pretty good. Episode 7 was probably one of the best episodes of Marvel television ever done. And so I came into this finale, I guess this 2-part finale, because it was episodes 8 and episode 9 at the end, released at the same time. And I said, okay, I'm on the fence. If episodes 8 and episode 9 suck, if they're like Secret Invasion finale, not good, I'm probably not going to like the show overall very much. But, there's the chance that these episodes could be pretty good, and then I end up liking the show. And I went into this pretty cautiously optimistic because, in my personal opinion, even though I like a lot of the MCU shows, to a certain extent, I don't think many of them have good finales. I would wager, the Hawkeye finale is fun, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier finale is pretty good for the show that it was. WandaVision finale was the weakest episode, probably, in the entire show, but it was still fine, it was still good. And I think the Loki season 2 finale is probably up there. But the other finales, Loki season 1, Moon Knight finale, not great. Miss Marvel finale, not great. Echo finale, don't even remember. The Kingpin dream sequence, whatever. So I went into this going, I just don't know what kind of finale this is going to be. Marvel hasn't really had a great track record with these finales. Let's see what you got. And I have to say, I commented about this on my community post the other day. But the finale, the last 2 episodes of Agatha all along, did something that I, in my wildest dreams, could not have imagined these 2 episodes doing. These 2 episodes not only were good, I think they were really quality episodes, but what they did was they made the previous 7 episodes even better. And that's not easy to do when you're in the finale. It's like the last 30 minutes of a movie, for example. You're in the final stretch, right? It is not easy to do that. It takes a lot of concepts, and this is a spoiler discussion, so we're going to talk about, obviously, the Witch's Road and Billy manifesting it. But it took the last, 7 episodes of television, and it took a lot of the parts where I was like, this doesn't feel like it's connected to anything. I don't get what's going on here. Frankly, the entire time, I didn't get the Witch's Road. It seemed so manufactured and so out of place and so random. Lo and behold, it is manufactured, it is random, it is personalized to Billy Maximoff. That's amazing. And so, yeah, we'll do, our usual play-by-play through the episode. I took notes, and we'll kind of walk through the episode and my thoughts on it. But just on a holistic level, before I dive in, these 2 episodes did what I don't think any other Marvel finale has done. Again, Loki season 2 finale was really good, but it was just more of a culmination of what had come before it, and it was good, really good. This finale, these 2 episodes here, and they're not perfect, in my opinion. We'll talk about the imperfections. They're not perfect. But I think what they did that none of the other finales had been able to do is make the show better. Now, this is still not my favorite MCU show. It's probably not even in the top 3, but I think it is pretty comfortably up there in the good to great, tiers of these MCU shows. It's not in the mid, it's not in the bad. It's pretty comfortably in the good. And I'll stew on it. Maybe I have to rewatch the whole show now, because there's a lot of things we know now as an audience that we didn't know going into the show, right? Given the story. Maybe that makes it better. I don't know. Maybe it makes it worse, honestly. So I think eventually I'll do a rewatch of this show when I do a big Phase 5 rewatch at some point. But for now, this was a really good show. It was a good show. Maybe I shouldn't say really good for me personally. It was a good show. And so we'll talk about episodes 8 and 9 as we go along. Again, if you really love the show, amazing. I had, probably maybe a less enjoyable experience, but I still think it was a good show. And so we'll talk about it here. So episode 8 starts out here, and we start out with Alice, and she's awoken by Rio/Death. And so we, have gotten more of Rio as she was revealed to be Death. And Aubrey Plaza, was kind of inspired casting for Lady Death, honestly, because she is that dour kind of, dark character. She can play that really well. Obviously, I know her best as April Ludgate in Parks and Rec, but she has played other characters like in Legion, and she's been doing a lot of other things like White Lotus. So she can play a lot of really interesting characters, and she can be unhinged too. In this scene, though, with Alice, she's a little bit more muted, which I think is a good take here. It's almost like the inevitability of death. By the way, I thought we were going to get a Thanos reference. I didn't see one. I thought we were going to get an explicit Thanos reference like, hey, also this purple guy has been chasing me around. it wouldn't have fit in the story, but, I thought we would have gotten something to nod to the comic books, but, it is what it is. But anyways, yeah. So there is, there's Rio coming to take Alice. And the interesting thing that's revealed very early on in this episode is that one of the things that makes her unhappy when she's talking to Agatha is that there is a soul. I don't quite know what Billy Maximoff is. I'm just going to call him a soul, but a soul in a dead body. And that obviously would kind of make death mad, right? That's not supposed to happen. And I think that is a really interesting take here. Also, I think the line that Jennifer Kale gives that, it tracks that Agatha's ex is death. That makes sense. And yeah, that was funny because it does make sense. I mean, it's Agatha Harkness after all. And boy, does she kill a lot of people. I suppose maybe that's where the romance started. We didn't really get a lot of insight into that in episode 9, but we'll get there. So it is, it's much more interesting now because we have this different angle about why Death is particularly upset at Billy Maximoff because he took over this guy's body. And then we, quote unquote, finish the Witch's Road before the final trial at least. And it turns out it's just a circle. So there's your first clue that something weird is going on here. And then, Billy puts on his shoes. And at this point, I'm like, are you kidding? Like, the secret to the Witch's Road is putting on your shoes. That's silly. But then, it leads to the trial. And at that point, I'm just kind of like, if the whole point of the Witch's Road was getting back to the start, putting on your shoes, I'm going to be a little bit annoyed because that's silly. But turns out the show had more up its sleeve, and I kind of subverted all my expectations. So here we go. We get into this little, imprisonment room, the morgue, I guess. And I think here is where episode 8 honestly gets a little bit sidetracked because while I have not minded the other witches in the coven, and I think Lilia got her time to shine in episode 7, I haven't personally been too attached to these characters. When Alice died, I sad for, Alice, obviously, under the circumstances. Honestly, out of all the deaths in this series, I think, Mrs. Hart or Sharon Davis or whatever her name is, the whole joke about Agatha not knowing who she was still, carries through the final 2 episodes. But I think her death affected me the most, honestly. And she was only in the series for about an episode and a half. So it goes to show you, what the other witches kind of meant to me. And so when we get into this whole unbinding situation with Jen, I was like, okay, this is interesting. This is kind of interesting. Can we get back to the main story though? And I just think that, yeah, I'm glad that Jen's story got resolved, and the actress who's playing her, great performance. She breaks down into tears once she's unbound. But at that point I was like, can we maybe, move on to the rest of the story? But that's just me personally. If you were invested in the characters, that's awesome. So, yeah, Agatha, reveals that she was the one who bound her, and she kind of sucks. I think one of the things that these 2 final episodes provide for us is that Agatha is, the character we're following through this show, but she is not a good person. She really is not a good person. Kind of like the Penguin, but I think to a much lesser extent in this show. But, I think that is made very clear in these final 2 episodes. Agatha then, reveals that she thinks she can bring Tommy back. And that's interesting because it turns out later that the Witch's Road isn't really real. And so I'm wondering, I think it's pretty clear by the end of this episode that Tommy's soul is in somebody's body, which I'm sure will be picked up in the Vision show. I'm sure it will. But I think it's interesting that, even though Agatha knew that the Witch's Road was wrong, or not wrong, but fake the whole time, that she still thinks that she can bring Tommy back. And they kind of did bring Tommy back, I guess. And there was that question that Billy screams, asking, does somebody have to die? In order for this to happen? It was intense. That whole sequence where they were bringing Tommy back, I guess it was intense, And then Billy disappears and Agatha escapes the trial, and there's Death, waiting for her in Westview. And the scene where, she cuts Agatha with all the glass shards, I found it a little bit uncomfortable. What's that thing? That thing where people have a problem, people get queasy when they see a bunch of little cuts or little holes, or there's some phobia. I don't have that, but I'm not going to lie that, I do get a little uncomfortable seeing all those cuts across her face. It was a little bit terrifying to me, honestly. So anyway, she's outside in the real Westview. These poor people, they allude to this in the episode, but these poor people are just like nonstop. I guess not nonstop. It's been 3 years since WandaVision, but still, this is the epicenter for just all these crazy magical things going on, and all the poor residents of Westview. But yeah, and Aubrey Plaza is sitting on top of the roof, and she is hamming it up, but honestly, it's good. I think that this kind of characterization for Death, it fits. And I think Aubrey Plaza was pretty inspired casting for the role here. Also kind of terrifying, honestly. And then probably the most random thing happens in this episode is that Billy just kind of floats down, and he's Wiccan now. if somebody could explain this genuinely, I'm a little confused in the comments. What happened between him leaving the trial and him coming back as fully powered Wiccan? I don't know. Where was this the whole time? Where was his costume? Honestly, I don't know. If somebody has an answer, though, I'd love to hear it in the comments down below. That I don't really get it, but you just kind of have to shrug it off because it's just, it's happening. Get on board, right? Also, the irony of a Maximoff giving his power to Agatha when, if you remember in the finale of WandaVision, that was the whole thing that Agatha wanted was Wanda's power. And I mean, that makes so much more sense now, right? Because Agatha's whole thing is taking people's powers. And that's really interesting. So then we get a little bit of a witch battle here. And what I was thinking at this point, because I actually checked a couple times during this episode. I hovered my cursor over the episode so that the little playback thing could pop up and the title of the episode could come up, because I actually thought for a little bit that I had clicked on episode 9 instead of episode 8. But no, this was episode 8. And what was interesting to me is that this episode felt like a finale. And so as the episode was coming to a conclusion, I was like, no, this is sort of a traditional Marvel finale. What's going to happen here? And, Agatha, quote unquote, or I guess she does really betray Billy here at the end. She gives Billy up, which is really cold. But then Billy brings up Nicholas Scratch, and Agatha kind of all of a sudden does a 180, which I found a little bit quick. I'm not going to lie. I think it's understandable given episode 9, but it still felt in the scene, the execution of it, a little bit quick. But conceptually, I totally get what happened there. And then Agatha dies, right? And at that point, I'm like, so wait a second. What is going to happen in episode 9? Because they're even, framing the ending. By the way, more WandaVision parallels, Billy pulling up his hood and leaving while the residents of Westview watch him. Anyone else catch that? Very WandaVision parallel there. But, the music is slowing down. It's becoming more somber, and we're kind of focusing in on Billy's life after Westview. And it's like, what is going on? Is this the end? What is episode 9 going to be about here? And then we go back to Billy's room, right? And so, Death is gone because I guess Agatha is, she wanted Agatha or she wanted Billy. So she got Agatha. And we go back to Billy's room, and one by one, the pieces start falling into place, because then we start to see all these little things here, right? The Ballad of the Witch's Road, the leaves, right? The shoes, the Wicked Witch costume. It's all been there the whole time. It's not been Agatha all along. It's been Billy all along. And Billy manifested the Witch's Road. The whole show suddenly snaps into focus in a way that I just did not think was possible. It was so cool how that happened. And we cut to black not before Billy turns around and hears someone laughing, which I assumed was Agatha. Now, I was not counting on Ghost Agatha coming out in episode 9, as we'll talk about that. But still, I mean, it was a pretty safe assumption that Catherine Hahn was not just going to sit out the entirety of the finale of her own show, right? So I knew that she would come back in a certain form. I thought she was just alive somehow. And honestly, going into episode 9, what I was thinking was it was going to be Agatha somehow escaped Rio, and then Rio was going to come back and they're all going to fight again, which I was going to be like, well, that's more the generic Marvel finale that I know. But hey, went into episode 9 and was like, okay, I'm on board now. I need answers. And so let's see what's going on here. So we start at episode 9, and it starts out in the 1730s, and it becomes very clear that, Catherine Hahn, Agatha, is giving birth to Nicholas Scratch. And I did not have Agatha giving birth, Catherine Hahn having to give birth on screen. Obviously not in that graphic detail, but I did not have that on my bingo card. But there you go. We're going to get an origin story of Nicholas Scratch. And interestingly, there are still some questions that are not answered, because it makes it seem like, because Agatha is a ghost now and Billy is searching for Tommy, it makes it seem like these questions might be answered. It makes me almost wonder if Agatha and Billy will have a bigger role in the Vision series or whatever Young Avengers project is going on here. I would wager yes, right? It seems like it, because there are still questions that are unanswered. Like, for example, she names Nicholas Scratch because she says she made him from scratch. So is this kind of a, Anakin Skywalker style birth without a father kind of situation, or what's going on here, right? So we didn't really get much clarity. We honestly didn't get much clarity on Nicholas Scratch, period, other than just who he was as a child. The other thing we did not get clarity on was how Agatha Harkness came upon the Darkhold. And I think that is something that we will have to, I think those two questions are honestly what I would like to get resolved, other than the whole Tommy subplot, which honestly, I don't have a big attachment to Tommy as a character, because he was just a kid in WandaVision. So whatever, they're going to find Tommy. But I think these are the questions that I have coming out of Agatha all along. So anyways, Agatha, she's walking around, and then she runs across this group of witches, and they invite her because they're very nice, and then she promptly kills them all. And it's just, again, showing that she's not a really good person at all. At this point, I was thinking to myself, it seems a little odd that they're devoting this much time to an extended flashback. And this is another thing where I go, these 2 episodes are really good. But in my eyes, personally, not perfect, because I think that we did need to see this flashback at a certain point. It felt like, though, it almost screeched the show's momentum to a halt. Now, eventually, it built back up a different kind of momentum because I got invested again in this Nicholas Scratch, Agatha Harkness subplot, which I think was great. I was really impressed by the whole thing. But I think that in terms of the pacing of the show, it almost felt like this was meant to be, wait until next week to find out what happens to when Billy screams, and then, kind of watch the next episode. Watching them back to back, though, it kind of felt like, oh, where did my answers go? What happened here? But again, the content itself of the flashbacks really helped to make it feel more worth it, because the content, this is great. All this stuff is great. So, you start hearing them sing together, and you realize that the Ballad of the Witch's Road was invented by Nicholas and Agatha. And that all of a sudden got things, turning in my head, gears turning in my head, because I was like, wait, so I thought Billy, made the road. How did the ballad come from Agatha, right? So these are all questions that were going on. And then, what this flashback really served to do that was so tragic, honestly, was it served to show how happy Agatha was in her own twisted way, because again, she was killing a lot of people, but in her own twisted way, she was so happy with her son. And even though she did some evil, terrible things, the song they made together, it just showed the genuine side of her, I guess, the good side of her. And it was really sad. It was honestly really sad here. And eventually Nicholas Scratch, for reasons unknown, right? Other things that we have to resolve here. Aubrey Plaza is still death. Death is death. You can't kill death? ? So we'll see where she comes up again. But I think there's a lot unresolved here. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing, honestly. There are, like, the Loki season 1 finale, I was like, come on, guys. But, or even the Moon Knight season finale was like, Jake Lockley in the last 2 minutes, really? But this show, I think, resolved its story while leaving a lot of doors open. Do I wish... Here's what I'll say. I don't really like the idea that the last shot of the series is them walking out and being like, let's go find Tommy, because then it's like, stay tuned for the next show. But, for the most part, they really resolved everything they needed to, while still layering in a lot of questions that I would like answers to. And I'm excited, intrigued to see where these characters come out next. And so, the Witch's Road is fake, right? And then we find out that the ballad is coming out here. And so we see Nicholas Scratch die, and then this witch comes and she's like, I've heard about this Witch's Road. And this is where it all clicks together again, right? Because Agatha uses the Ballad of the Witch's Road to get power from other witches, and she kills all these people. It makes the first 8 episodes better, and that's something that not a lot of shows can do. It's incredible, and you get to see moments from the first 8 episodes that are recontextualized now. Like when the Witch's Road opens, you see that Agatha Harkness is just as surprised as anybody else is. And it's really good. It's just so good how they were able to do that. And so now Agatha is a ghost. We're back in present day, and they have this conversation. Billy thinks that he killed all the witches on the Witch's Road, and Alice and Mrs. Hart and Lilia, but Agatha's kind of trying to comfort him. And yeah, it's interesting. It's also interesting, I guess, to think about how much power this kid has, because even Wanda Maximoff had, she's being the Scarlet Witch, used an incredible amount of power to conjure the hex. And this was not even the hex. This was almost an entire dimension, almost. And so I find it interesting, right? I find it interesting. I don't think it's necessarily a plot hole, but it's something I would like to see explored, of where this power came from, how much he was able to harness and understand how much he was able to use it. But anyways, there's that. And then, Billy tries to banish Agatha. I still maintain I'm not a super big fan of reading out the Latin stuff. Like, if you're going to do magic, it's fine. Just do magic. You don't have to read Latin things and, spin in circles and stuff like that. I don't know. I found that part of the show not the best, honestly, because honestly, Scarlet Witch she's a witch, right? She's literally called the Scarlet Witch. And I know people in the comments have been like, but it's cosmic energy. But Agatha uses the same kind of cosmic energy as Scarlet Witch, and you never see Scarlet Witch saying Latin words and spinning in circles in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, which would have been kind of ridiculous, honestly. So, I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Maybe it's just me. But anyways, and then Agatha, she says she can't face Nicholas Scratch in the afterlife, which is interesting, not really explored. Also, the MCU has 17 different afterlives, so I don't even know what this is referring to. And she's a ghost. They go look for Tommy, and that's the end of the show. No post-credit scene here to speak of. Also, it does feel very much like Star Wars-y, although it feels Star Wars-y in the sense of there's a floating, transparent Force ghost kind of person hanging out with you, but also in a different way where it's like, it's not like this is a benevolent spirit. It almost feels like Agatha is there to kind of just mess with Teen. I keep calling him Teen. Billy. And it's really interesting. So guys, that was Agatha all along. And just to give some final thoughts on the wrap up here. Look, there are episodes in this show. This was 9 episodes, which I appreciate. It wasn't 6 episodes, thank goodness. I hope most MCU shows from here on out are longer than 6 episodes because, my gosh, I know Ironheart is probably going to be 5 episodes or 6 episodes because it was made during the original Bob Chapek era. But, Agatha all along, Daredevil Born Again is going to be 9 episodes. I hope Wonder Man is longer. I think it is 9 or 10 episodes, which is good. I hope they keep doing that. I hope they keep doing that with Nova, with Vision. I think that'll be good. But, this is a show that I had very little expectations for. And for the most part, through the first half of the season, my expectations were met. It wasn't a high bar to clear. I was like, it's okay, right? On balance. And I think that there were episodes that I liked. I liked the first few episodes, and I did not connect with the middle section of the Witch's Road, right? And maybe that changes. Maybe that changes now that I know what's going on here. Maybe now I understand that this is all a manifestation of Billy's mind, that it makes a lot more sense here. But I also think that it's hard for me to say now holistically how I feel about the show because the last 3 episodes changed my perception of the whole show altogether. And that in itself, by the way, even if I need to rewatch the show eventually to kind of figure out how I feel, that in itself is amazing that the show is able to do that. It shows that Jack Schaefer, Marvel should keep Jack Schaefer around. She knows how to write twists and turns, and she knows how to how to build characters and then lay groundwork for things. Sometimes the payoff takes a little bit of time. I would say that having to get through episodes 4 and 5 while still thinking The Witch's Road is kind of ridiculous, right? And then having to wait until episodes 8 and 9 to figure out why, it was a long payoff. I'm somebody who was going to finish the show anyways because I wasn't hating the show. I was enjoying it somewhat. But maybe there were people who jumped off the bandwagon a little bit earlier and they didn't get the payoff because they would have had to wait until the finale to get the payoff. But nonetheless, Jack Schaefer is a gifted storyteller. And, to take a character that I thought Catherine Hahn was very charismatic in WandaVision, but I was not clamoring for a spin-off series at all. To take that kind of character and put her in a spot of running a show and having the show be probably in my top 5 MCU TV shows, I would say WandaVision is head and shoulders number 1 for me. This is not a formal ranking. I'll do more of a formal ranking probably towards the end of the year. But, WandaVision head and shoulders above everyone else. And then probably Loki season 2, probably Hawkeye, probably Miss Marvel, and then probably Agatha all along. These are all good shows to me. With, the bottom couple having some problems, I think. Having some things that I didn't like as much. But, I think that these are all good shows. And I'm really happy, honestly. I'm always happy to have things that I was just having low expectations for pull it off. I'm always really happy about that. And I can tell that a lot of people in the comments that have been commenting really like the show, and that's awesome. That's so awesome. I'm glad that Marvel is on somewhat of a winning streak. I mean, the winning streak is 2 for me, Deadpool and Wolverine and Agatha all along. And I didn't hate Echo, by the way. I just thought it's fine. It's whatever. But I mean, on a streak of, these are 2 good projects. And so, Daredevil Born Again or Captain America Brave New World is next. Daredevil Born Again, followed by Thunderbolts, followed by Ironheart. Let's get on a roll here, right? Let's get on a roll and see what happens. So guys, that is it for Agatha all along. What did you think of the series? What did you think of the last 2 episodes? Let me know in the comments down below. What were your favorite episodes? Some of your favorite moments? I'd love to hear and continue the discussion in the comments down below. Alright guys, so I was originally going to end this episode out with Agatha all along, seeing as it was the finale, right? It was the series finale, and of course we talked about Agatha all along, but something else interesting happened during the week, and I decided barring anything else crazy happening before I finish this recording, and before I upload the podcast, we'll be talking about this new MCU television trailer as the final segment of this podcast, because I think this is really interesting, right? It gives you a little bit of an insight into some projects that we haven't really heard that much about since really the beginning of the year. I mean, it's been a long time since we've heard about any of these projects other than little snippets here and there. Daredevil Born Again, obviously we've heard some things about, but other ones we haven't. So I'm just going to go through, because we've gotten release dates for almost every single project and at least time windows for these projects. So I'm going to go through because there's this little trailer that they released. It's about a minute and a half long, that talk about or that show little snippets of all these MCU Disney Plus projects. And this is not going to be a frame by frame breakdown. There are other channels like New Rockstars or whatever that do really great stuff with that. So if you want a true frame by frame breakdown, this is not really what this is. This is more just me giving cursory thoughts about what I've seen and just reiterating, if I'm still excited, if I'm not excited, if this increased my excitement, all that kind of good stuff. So let's go through these projects. There's a lot in here, so we're not going to spend too much time on each one, just a little bit talking about what we see and talking about the release dates. So first up in release order, we have actually November 12th, a Marvel Studios film, because Deadpool and Wolverine will be coming out on November 12th. 2024 on Disney Plus, and that's exciting because we finally get to see Deadpool and Wolverine and all the cameos, all the goodness. Human Torch. Sorry if that's a spoiler if you haven't seen Deadpool and Wolverine yet, but it's going to be really exciting to see Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds come to Disney Plus. So Deadpool and Wolverine, November 12th, 2024. The first new project, What If Season 3, premieres on December 22nd, 2024, and the new episodes will be dropping daily. I believe they did this with What If Season 2, which I think came out only a year ago. And so this will just be a little Christmas time fun thing. I might do a wrap up. I might come back when it's over. I think early January is when it ends, or late December, and I'll do a wrap up, talk about What If Season 3. Hasn't been my all-time favorite show. It's, just kind of interesting. It almost feels more like YouTube videos, honestly, just concepts, but I'll be watching them because they're short or whatever. The one thought I had when watching the footage here is that this is where we see Shang-Chi again, because not in his own sequel film, surely not. We couldn't do that for one of the most popular new characters in Phase 4. Instead, we have to see him as a cowboy in What If. We'll talk about another interesting actor in an animated Marvel show. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about if you've seen this little clip here. But Shang-Chi is a cowboy and some other things. I think Hydra Stomper was there and Cap Shield. I don't even know. It's going to be interesting for sure. So then, coming up in 2025 now, we have Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, which is coming out in January 25th, 2025. It looks cute. The animation style is cutesy and kind of artsy, and I don't really have any expectations for this. I'm assuming this is another kind of multiversal Spider-Man show, and I don't really know what else it is. I'm assuming this is not Tom Holland's Peter Parker, or if it is, it's some slight variation of Tom Holland's Peter Parker. I know that Norman Osborn is going to be in it, Harry Osborn, and Doctor Strange is going to be in it, Daredevil is going to be in it. So I honestly have no idea what to expect from this show, and we'll see. We'll have to see about it, but it looks cute. Definitely looks cute. Speaking of Daredevil, though, we get our first actual footage, not the leaked D23 trailer, but our first actual look at the footage for Daredevil Born Again, coming March 4th, 2025. And there are some really interesting snippets here. We obviously see more interactions between not Kingpin and Daredevil, because, Charlie Cox gave an interview recently where he said, you probably won't see those two characters, those two alter egos, I should say, interact that much, because they really are going to, you don't expect one of them to come out alive if they come confront each other. And I think that's fair. But I think we will get a lot more of Wilson Fisk and Matt Murdock. And I think we see that in the trailer. They're having lunch or dinner together at a diner. They're talking about their careers. It looks like they're both doing well, quote unquote, and moving up in the world. And we also see some other fun characters like Muse. It looks terrifying, looks really creepy. We see Punisher, and that's exciting. And then we see, interestingly enough, Kamal Khan's dad, Miss Marvel's dad, at the very end of the trailer. We knew that he was coming, that had been reported, but still really interested to see why he needs Matt Murdock as a lawyer. What happened? Maybe it's because he went to space or something. I have no idea, honestly. In the Marvels, he went to space, so we'll see. But Daredevil Born Again is probably easily, out of all these projects, my most anticipated that's upcoming, so that's exciting. Then, another release date, Ironheart, June 24th, 2025. And look, I am somebody who loves Black Panther Wakanda Forever. I know not everyone does, and that's totally fine, but I am someone who resonated with that movie very deeply. And it was helping, it was part of my catharsis and emotional healing after Chadwick Boseman died. And I know that I've never even met the guy, and the movie really just was an emotional movie experience for me. That being said, Ironheart, not my favorite part of the movie. I think that she could have been handled a little bit better. She was just kind of there, and then she left. And seemed like just set up for her own Disney Plus show. I will say the suit up here looks very cool. I think in Black Panther Wakanda Forever, the suit, as seems to happen in the MCU, whenever someone gets a vibranium anything or whatever, or nanotech or something like that, it just looks more glossy in CGI. But here the suit actually looks quite good. It's reflective, so it feels very tactile. It almost feels like those engineering projects, those Boston Dynamic robots, kind of feels a sleek metallic, I guess, kind of finish, which I like because it's very, it pays homage to the old Iron Man suit, so that's cool. Looks more tactile. And then we see the hood a little bit, Anthony Ramos, and it looks, I don't know how to feel about it. I'm not excited, but I'm not excited either. It's very similar to how I feel about Agatha all along, just how I felt before watching the show for Agatha all along, and maybe to a lesser extent Echo, because Echo I didn't even know what to expect from Echo, and we got Echo, and now it seems like we're not going to see the character again. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, we'll see about Ironheart. We'll see how it fits into the wider MCU. Rumors of Mephisto showing up, so we'll see. We'll see about that. And then on August, it is August 6th, 2025, we will get Eyes of Wakanda. Speaking of Wakanda, this is an animated show that goes through history and shows Wakandan history. And honestly, for animated shows, this is more of what I wanted to see. Canon MCU shows that you really can't do an entire show about or an entire movie about, so you just do a 4-episode animated special, and I think that that's cool. Honestly, would prefer to see these kinds of things more often than Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. I have no idea what that's about. But yeah, this looks interesting. We didn't really get to see anything about it, but there is that. Another animated show, Marvel Zombies. I don't know what we're doing here. This comes out on October 2025. Yeah, I mean, Blade as Moon Knight. So Mahershala Ali is officially in the MCU now, or he was in the MCU, I guess, in Eternals, but he's now officially in the MCU as an animated character. He still has not appeared in live action as Blade, so there's that. But yeah, I mean, honestly, could not care less about this show. I don't see the point in it, but it's gonna come out, and I'm sure I'm gonna watch it and talk about it on this podcast in a year. Good grief, in a year. And yeah, there is that. So Marvel Zombies. And the final project to talk about here is one actually that we got some decent footage for, and that's Wonder Man, coming out in December 2025. Wonder Man is interesting because it looks like it's really diving into the whole Hollywood aesthetic. It takes place in Hollywood. It's an actor, Simon Williams, I think, who is going to try to play this fictional part of Wonder Man who also has powers in a certain sense. And it's going to be interesting to see that. And I love the dynamic here between Ben Kingsley and Yahya Abdul-Mateen. It's great. It's great to see Ben Kingsley back. It's fun that they keep inserting him back into projects like Shang-Chi and now into Wonder Man. I think that's really fun because Ben Kingsley is awesome. I know that he wasn't my favorite part of Iron Man 3. You can go check out my rewatch video I did all the way back in 2020 of Iron Man 3. I think my thoughts are pretty much the same, though. It's, it wasn't a terrible movie at all. It was very entertaining, but there were just some parts that were kind of odd, and I think that Trevor Slattery was one of them. But I think since Iron Man 3, they've found really fun ways, All Hail the King, Shang-Chi, and now Wonder Man, to use the character, which is really fun. And I like the kind of sitcom-y, aesthetic to it. It's not, it feels less MCU, and it feels like it's filmed on a backlot. And I think that's totally the point, and I'm actually quite interested in it. I wouldn't say I'm excited yet. I just don't know what to expect from the show, because it feels like it could be a WandaVision kind of thing, right? Not that emotional, but sort of the aesthetic of just doing something different in the MCU. And I think that that's awesome. So guys, those were all the projects that we got some looks at, some glimpses at in the MCU television trailer. Are you excited for any of them? I would say out of these projects, I think it's clearly number 1, it's Daredevil Born Again. I think number 2, though, would have to be Wonder Man, followed by Ironheart, and then, the animated shows. I'm not super interested in the animated shows, honestly, but still, if you guys are, let me know in the comments down below. I'm hopeful because these shows, I think, are produced very intentionally, at least the live action ones, by Kevin Feige, especially Ironheart. Ironheart was supposed to come out 2 years ago, and I think Kevin Feige went, nope, not good enough, and they didn't have to reshoot all of it. I don't think they reshot some of it, but I think more of it was in the edit bay. And I think that Kevin Feige, again, is being much more intentional about what gets greenlit, what gets, the kind of quality that gets put out. So Daredevil Born Again, very excited for. That obviously got scrapped and then redone, and I think it's going to be awesome. Ironheart, hopeful for. And Wonder Man, I think, is a Kevin Feige project, and I'm very curious to see why. I'm very curious to see what's going on there as well. So let me know in the comments down below which projects you're most excited for based on the teaser trailer. We'd love to hear those thoughts down below. And guys, that will do it for episode 47 of Access Blockbusters Pod. This was a supersized episode. It wasn't the longest one. I had one that was about 2 hours long a couple weeks ago. I understand if you guys didn't stick around for the whole thing. Totally understandable. That's why I have time codes always in every single episode in the description down below, as well as posting the clips. That's honestly why, because I understand different people just have different preferences. Some people like to listen to a big 2-hour podcast on double or triple speed. Totally great. Some people like it just to have it on in the background. Totally great as well. Some people just want to hear my thoughts on specific things, which is why the clips are posted. So whatever method or whatever platform you're using to listen to the podcast, I appreciate it so very much. Episode 47, it has been a big week, a big week, and it's not going to slow down here. We have Penguin still to talk about for a couple more weeks. Obviously, Agatha has finished, but then we have other shows. I know other DC shows like Harley Quinn is coming out. Obviously, Skeleton Crew is coming out as well. Creature Commandos will be here soon. So a lot of fun things to talk about. Dune Prophecy, like we talked about last week. So make sure to stay tuned on the YouTube channel for all those updates. Guys, it has been a pleasure as always. I will see you guys soon. Hopefully you guys have a great week and look forward to talking about more things in the next one. So thank you all again so much for listening, and I will see you guys in the next one.